So now we're going to talk about how to move on from a gesture pose onto more of a 5 to 10 minute developed pose. So just to review, this is an example of a gesture pose that you could do within 45 to 60 seconds. You gain the main flow and feel of the pose, and then they're starting to bulk in a little bit. This has a little bit of the details of what they're wearing. Just a quick gesture pose right here. This is something that starts out as a gesture pose and then keeps getting developed. This is one example of where a 5-minute pose may end up for you. And this is would be a good example of a 5 to 10 minute pose. So today we're going to talk you through how to kind of bulk things up, how to pay attention to details, and then a little bit of shading. This is another student example. So this would be another example of maybe like a 5 to 10 minute pose. If somebody's sitting, don't put a lot of effort into what they're sitting on. Just kind of keep that stick figure. But you can see how they developed the pose, got some details, and then they were just beginning to add in some shading when they ran out of time. All right, another good example. And this is a good example of using hatching, parallel lines that you can use to create shadow, which gives you the 3D element, which we are working towards now. So we're going to work on that with a 5 to 10 minute pose. You guys are working up to 10-minute poses. So in a 10-minute pose, once again, you can see there's exploratory marks where they started with a gesture pose and they kind of redrew and figured out where things were. There's extra lines. And they got their landmarks, where are the shoulders, where are the hips, knee, ankle. And then we start getting some of the details. So a little bit of profile, where the ear is, another good landmark, collar, and then wrinkles and folds, which we're going to talk about, and a little bit of shading to give us a little bit of form. So this is just a great example of a 5 to 10 minute pose, depending on how comfortable you are with figure drawing now. For some people this is a 5-minute pose. For some people this would be 10. This is a good example of a different kind of style. In class we use a lot of charcoal, so it's a little bit of a quick smudging to get a little bit of that form coming out and paying attention to highlight and shadow. Okay, another good example of possibly a 5-minute pose, and once again in a little bit of a different style, a little bit of that hatching technique again. There's not a lot of shading on this, so we're going to aim to be a little bit more developed, but this is a good example of reworking the pose, getting our landmarks, where's the knee versus the ankle and foot, elbows, shoulders, and tricky for shortening. And this is a nice example of a quick, mostly line with a little bit of shading going on, but this is a little bit more developed in terms of a little bit more in the face and the actual look of the person. We don't need to worry about that right now. We're not worrying about portraits. This is a person who would draw pretty quickly and had time to do all this in a 5 to 10 minute pose, but you can just see another different type of style. All right, and one more pose. This is a 7-minute pose. So for some people this would be 5 if you draw quickly. For some people this might be where you end up on 10. So once again, you can see those exploratory marks. This starts out as a gesture pose. By no means is this a finished, product where you're erasing. You have exploratory, and then editing, finding our landmarks, shoulder, elbow, knee, ankle, hips, wrists, paying attention, and then starting to get a little bit of details. So we have some folds in the fabric, and we start having a little bit of shadow to start getting that depth. So now let's talk through the whole process, how to start from gesture and work to adding in proportions, landmark, bulking up, details, fabric, etc. And maybe a little bit of shading. So if I was doing this pose, say somebody was standing for me, or I took a picture that I was working from in this instance. In class we would be working from live model. But if I was doing this, my first reaction is to just kind of start thinking through like what is the actual pose. So once again, I'm going to kind of see if I can get that nice S curve in the hips. This instance, shoulder and hips are both kind of going down. What is the angle of the arm? That arm's up. We got this, and then one leg here, and the other leg straight. So in a quick couple of seconds, I got my gesture drawing. So I have the basic gesture, so now I'm going to kind of add to it and figure out like where is my torso. My torso is mostly got shoulder here and shoulder here. Got torso generally in there. What direction are my hips? And as you've watched different videos on this, kind of plug in the hips as a kind of a bucket they talk about. Okay, if one hip is here, my leg, the knee is straight, going down here. One hip is more here, gonna go forward to the knee and kind of going down. So one thing that if I had this person in front of me, one thing I would do is I would check, you know, alignment, knee and elbow. How far out does the knee stick out from the elbow? So I kind of use this paper as a guideline. The knee should be out farther than the elbow. What else is in line? Hips are in line, almost under wrist, those sorts of things. So I'm going to be kind of doing a few different checks. So as I do this, this knee kind of needs to maybe be out a little, even a little bit more. This knee should be higher up. This one should be higher up than this one as this comes. So you can see I'm in the process of re-editing each time I do this. And as I go, this elbow should be here. So this shoulder is maybe a little bit lower down as it starts to the elbow. And then it kind of comes back because it's draping over her head. Okay, so start plugging in where the head is. I can't see the neck because of the hair. You can see how this is starting to come. So the shoulder kind of wraps around here. Got that curve, one hip here. I'm going to start on the details. We're going to talk about that in a second. So you can see I'm kind of plugging in information, but I'm also starting to, you know, try to think like anatomy, but also plugging in, bulking up. Just kind of, we're going to block in the feet for now. Okay, so you got the rough idea of where this is headed. Kind of blocking where the knee is. And the other leg. Now I am up to, I have kind of done my gesture. I've kind of bulked in. And now I need to definitely do some measuring. So on my original, this would be where I would, if I was looking at the person, I would be doing these comparative measurements. Shoulder to elbow is the same as shoulder to the wrist. So now I start plugging that in. So now I know this is going to kind of wrap around right in here. This and this are going to be the same. So I can kind of start that process a little bit more solidly. What about from shoulder to shoulder? Compare it to something else. I'm going to compare it. So shoulder to shoulder should be a little bit less than this, which we got. All right. How much of this arm? I got a little bit more. I can also check this angle. So this arm should actually kind of maybe go a little bit there, or maybe I need to have a little bit more of this. Okay, so I'm going to make my adjustments because I did need to kind of swoop out this a little bit. All right, and so on. Measure this to this. Maybe measure this to this. And I keep going. So you can see right now, you know, there's a few things I need to fix. I need to kind of get some of them, I kind of leaned them out a little bit. I need to get a little bit more of that bulk going in here and get a little bit more of that swoop, that S curve. It actually comes in a little bit more and then swoops out a little bit there. So as I'm kind of putting this person's hip out there, I have the basic gesture. I've kind of bulked the person up. I've checked my proportions and looked for landmarks. I know where my shoulders are, my elbows, hips, and such.